Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Embracing Diversity conversation. We will be doing part 2 of Breaking the School to Prison Pipeline, Strategies for Immediate Prison Reform. Our host and moderator is Reverend Vicki L. Hughes, and she will lead our discussion tonight.
Good evening. Welcome to Embracing Diversity. This is our 10th dialogue, and last time we dialogued on October 7th, and we conversed about the subject of the school to prison pipeline, and we began talking about prison reform. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the same subjects, but focusing more on the prison reform areas, because we did spend quite a bit of time last time on the school to prison pipeline. These subjects are so important, so we have decided to come back for a part 2 tonight. Tonight I have some guest panelists with me. Some are educators, ministers, attorneys, and we may have a counselor join us later on. We also have some other professionals as well. What we hope that you will learn tonight are these things, and as well as other things. What you can do as parents to ensure that your kids are not headed down the school to prison pipeline. Also, you will learn how aware teachers protect minority kids and or students with disabilities from labels and from getting involved in that pipeline as they go from grade to grade. And you will learn some things that we all can do as the public to assist in matriculating ex-offenders back into society, and things that we can do, or just things to be aware of as prisoners are actually in prison, ways to help improve the prison system. So to get started, let me just briefly mention the school to prison pipeline theory and a few other things, and then I'll start getting my panelists and guest panelists engaged in dialogue. The school to prison pipeline theory is, and these are a few facts I got off of the internet. It says in the United States, the school to prison pipeline, the acronym is SPP. It's also known as the school to prison link, or the schoolhouse to jailhouse track. And it is the disproportionate tendency of minors and young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds to become incarcerated because of increasingly harsh school and municipal policies. What causes this school to prison pipeline? It says many under-resourced schools become prison gateways by placing increased reliance on police rather than teachers and administrators to maintain discipline. Growing numbers of districts employ school resource officers to patrol school hallways, often with little or no training in working with youth. Who is most affected by the school to prison pipeline? Students from 2 groups, racial minorities and children with disabilities, are disproportionately represented in the school to prison pipeline. And the last thing I want to mention is, it says how to avoid the pipeline, and it suggests recognizing positive behavior, work with police departments and court systems to limit arrests at school, explain infractions and the prescribed punishments to the student body, train teachers on using positive behavior modification for at-risk students. So let me see. Okay, so I have one educator on tonight. So Quinn, this is Ms. Quinn Scarvey. If you could just talk about, I know you are at one school right now, and I believe you've been at other schools. Do you know of any stories where a child may have been heading down that prison pipeline scenario? And do you have a story like that? If so, share it.
Well, let me think for a second how I can frame it without revealing any information.
Okay.
I mean, you definitely see kids in any school that have home situations where they have a close relative that is in prison, that's incarcerated. And whether that's revealed by the child or you find out through, school administration or perhaps the resource officer, it's so important to build relationships with those kids. I mean, all kids, but those kids in particular, and let them know that they can be what they dream to be. And just recognizing that as educators, we are mentors first and foremost. So making sure that we follow these kids and don't just say, oh, here's your homework, here's your assignment, like get to know them as individuals.
Okay, does anybody have a story where a kid with a disability was labeled as a problem kid, behavioral kid, and was starting to head down this prison pipeline because the teachers and all educators at that school really had labeled that kid and really thought the kid was heading to prison or just to get in trouble, period. Does anybody have know of anyone like that, a child with a disability?
I would say that I don't necessarily know. I don't know if the child, one person in particular that I can think of off the top of my head, necessarily had a disability, but I do question whether or not he does or did have a disability and whether or not he had been tested for disability given the interactions and his behaviors. Oddly enough, that kid is now in prison for a very horrific crime.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Attorney Neal. And Attorney Neal, since you weren't on last time, could you briefly tell people what you do, the type of law you practice and everything?
Yeah, I'm Rico Neal. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I've been a licensed attorney for 15 or so years, 10 of which I was a prosecutor. For the last few years, I've been doing criminal defense work, so I come into contact with a lot of our most favorable members of the community, both as a prosecutor and both as a defense attorney.
Okay, thank you. And Attorney Neal is practicing in Michigan, state of Michigan. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. What would any of you all could answer this question? What can parents do to keep their kids out of the pipeline radar if their kids are in, let's say, elementary school? I mean, that's where it starts. So does anybody want to answer that one? What can parents do to keep their kids out of this pipeline?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. Just, in dealing with my line of work and coming into contact with the individuals that I do come into contact, whether it's the kids or the parents, there has been a clear breakdown of the whole family dynamic and the home structure, which has led to the situation in which we find ourselves in. I'm sure some of you would agree that back when we were kids and growing up, there was a saying that says it takes a village to raise a child. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply anymore because nowadays, when you have people in positions of authority or people in positions of power, or just your regular neighbor or close friend, when they come into contact with these young individuals, kids, and they try to discipline them in some way, oftentimes what I have seen is the parent takes exception. And it takes two forms. And I'll say it because during law school, I taught both in the urban schools and I taught in suburban school, predominantly white. And the reaction of the parent is it's opposite of one another, depending on what school you're at. In the predominantly white school, when you discipline the kid, the parent would come there and join forces with you and discipline the kid as well and get the kid back in line. Where in the inner city urban school, where it's predominantly Black, the parent would come to the school and ask the teacher why they're disciplining their child. And it would escalate from there to the point where I've seen parents come to the school and get into fights with their children, fighting other students and or parents, which is the total opposite of what happens in the predominantly white school. So when you talk about how can you fix this problem, part of it is going to start within the home and reestablishing the lack of respect that is shown to authority coming out of the home. That's the main problem.
I couldn't disagree more. And I'll just dive in. I'm sorry to, I hope you finish, Brother Neil. But that old adage of it taking a village to raise a child has some underlying information there that is not stated but automatically known. Villages are communal groupings, meaning people know each other, they have relationships. So not just anyone has ever been able to discipline just everybody's child, and vice versa. These are people that you had relationships with. Your parents knew the neighbors up the street, or the aunts, uncles, cousins down the block, and if they said something, then because of that relationship, they knew that they could be trusted to discipline your child and send them home to you, and you would discipline them also. We don't have, because of how the society is now, many of our people are so communal. Many young people live in transit housing, they're in apartments, they're in rental units, and statistics show that they move a lot. How could they possibly have those same kinds of community structures now when our neighborhoods and communities are totally different than they were 50 years ago? And secondly, when it comes to the parents coming to the schools, when the parent does come to the school in a predominantly white neighborhood, there has already been continued communication, relationships that have been developed. And even if they're not relationships that have been developed, just the fact that they look the same way that you do and are of the same hue, there's a familiarity that's in place already, that they're accepting of that teacher as to not be harmful to their child. So of course they're going to join in with you because they already believe that the teacher has the child's best interest automatically, just because of how the person looks. We don't teach that in our neighborhoods. That's no longer a part of our structure, our family dynamic in many households, especially in lower income households. And so I think we do young mothers and young parents a disservice if we say the white family comes and they want to get the child straight, and the black family comes and they want to fight with the parents in the schools. That happens. But that would be a situation where somebody has not gotten impulse control, been taught, how to resolve conflicts in different ways, maybe don't have the best listening skills, all things that we developed in dealing one with another when we had a different type of society and community that you were talking about earlier, where we were in a neighborhood and we could actually deal one with another. I think there's a whole lot more that leads into that young black parent not giving you the response that you want, other than it just being their shortfall, their shortfall.
Yes.
If I could piggyback off of that, Reverend, I definitely felt your words. And I think that's, as teachers, though we have a lot on our plates, the first thing that every teacher should be doing every school year is building those relationships. Because I know good and well I can't contact anybody's mama about their baby getting in trouble unless I've made a contact first to reach out and get to know that family and say, hey, it's a pleasure to have your child in my class. And I want you to know that this is a partnership and I'm here for you. If I haven't done that, then I would feel so amiss to be calling about a problem in the classroom. And I think a lot of teachers probably haven't quite figured that out yet.
Yeah, I think both of you well, all of you have made some strong points towards the whole scenario. One of the big issues that I find is that we've always used that it takes a village, but we really didn't use it in the right context because it really wasn't the village that we had back years ago. What we had was family. We had family, extended family, and things like that. You know, we had situations where the teachers at the school were known by the parents. You know, they were familiar because they lived in the neighborhoods or were around, and so you know the families, the parents, or whatever knew that they had a better trust relationship with the teachers. Now teachers come from a little bit of everywhere. They're so transitory with the schools. At least here they are, and so they're switching all the time. We don't know who's who and whether or not they have the interest of the child at heart or not. You know, even in this situation, I have a daughter now that's going to school virtually, and out of 6 teachers, I think we've only heard from 2. And it's just such a dichotomy, and a couple of the ones that I thought that we should have heard from, we haven't. Um, you know, because and you know the problem we needed to hear, put it that way, because we needed to get on some things. Fortunately, there are 2 parents that are on top of things, and we caught stuff before it became a big problem, and we're able to fix stuff and get our child back on track. But you know, so those kind of things are missing. We don't have that trust in the teachers. We don't have that faith that they're there for the child's best interest and not just there to make state reports and get their check, you know, and make sure that their kids pass the state board exam. I mean, I do get it. There's a lot of pressures that's put on them to make sure that they have a certain percentage that pass the exams or whatever.
Math
But
tests and all of those.
a lot of that still should not be forsaken for the sake of relationship building with a child. And I think that the relationship, Ms. Quinn, I'm glad you're here, but I'm glad you have that attitude. But I think the relationship with a child is so underrated these days.
Mhm.
My best memories from school growing up all occurred in classrooms where the teacher took extreme interest and they made an indelible imprint, not just on me scholastically, but on me in other ways, physically, emotionally, mentally, those kind of intangibles. Um, you know, even mimicking different patterns and behaviors and things like that. And so a lot of that is so important. And because sometimes we don't get a chance, or the kids don't get a chance to watch and model their parents at home, because you know by the time they get home, parents are sometimes still at work or gone to another job or gone to do whatever they may be doing. And you know, oftentimes, especially in our inner city, the kids are off to fend for themselves from the time they get home till you know whenever it's about time to go to bed. And so the modeling, the mentoring that we look for is not there except during the daytime. And of course, it's that daytime, at least for that 8 to 9 months of the year, it's that daytime that covers a bulk of the child's cognitive experience. You know, when they're most alert, when they're most watching, when they're most into whatever is going on around. And so it is important, I believe, that we do have good models as the teachers and not just figures up there that are reciting, you know, rules and functions and events so that they can say that they taught for a day.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Dupree.
Can I add something to that, Vicky? Just real
Yes.
quickly. I think also what goes into that, or the ability to have those relationships develop, also goes to how we've structured our education system and the funding and public support that goes towards it. We have school systems where the best performing school districts are rewarded and they get more money, better teachers, and every resource and advantage. And the underfunded inner city or impoverished schools, they get less. They, you know, some schools don't even get textbooks or usable items, and teachers are going in their pockets buying things. Not to mention, the classes are larger. In suburban schools, statistics will show you that the classes are smaller. There's a much more manageable group. Inner city or in the lower income neighborhoods, classes are larger. And so you can have one or two bad actors in the class basically monopolize the time, and no one is learning because the teacher is going through the efforts of trying, like herding cats, is trying to deal with, as soon as this little fire is put out, there's another one, because there's such a large group that such a large group of children that have not been taught how to control their impulses and stay in their spaces the way that they should. And I think that's a real big problem that we oftentimes overlook. I personally feel that our Department of Education and those institutions that are designed to best promote the education of our children are very smart people. So I don't see how they can't see the flaw in giving more money to the schools that already have money and underfunding the schools that are starving and dying out. Unless there is some logic or something else in play that is not being verbally spoken, I just don't get it. And I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but there's clearly something wrong with that model, and it continues to feed the process, and children drop out. And we know that when they drop out, or because they don't have those relationships, they slip between the cracks, all of those things, we know that it increases their possibility of being in contact with law enforcement and ending up in prison, at a much higher rate. I think the last time I checked statistics, is like 32% of high school dropouts are going to be involved in the system at some point in time. So it's a vicious cycle.
Yes, it is. I wanted to ask Reverend Eleazar Partida a question, since he is a Latina person on our panel. Could you, I know you live on the North Carolina coast and you are exposed to the Latina community, Native American, Black communities. Do you have any comments about what's going on in your area as far as how kids are treated and what the parents are like? Do you know Eleazar is a pastor of a United Methodist Church, or two of them, right? So,
no, just one.
Just one. Okay.
Just
so
one.
what has your experience been?
Yeah, I feel a little inadequate in this panel today. Just not, I mean, I don't have a lot of experience, with the children and the education system and I'm not even a parent or anything. So I mean, I feel I don't have too much to add to it, other than what I have seen, at my own church, and what we try to do as a community, and how do we try to make sure our kids stay out of trouble, and make sure, like some of the other guys just mentioned, I mean, building relationships, making sure that there are activities for these kids to do after school, so they won't be wandering the streets by themselves, and just having the resources there available to help them if they need help with their schoolwork and assignment, and really trying to create a community around here, with our kids and our children. And so I think that's what we try to do, at least at the church where I'm at right now. I know that there are many who don't get to experience that. It's just the reality of the life that we live. It is a very impoverished area. There's a lot of kids who come from different backgrounds and stuff, and so obviously my little small church can't touch everyone in the community, but those who we can touch, we try to do some of these things that I know a lot of the other people on this panel have been talking about. But yeah, I mean, this is something, I guess, that we're experiencing all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you, Reverend Partita. I believe my event specialist has a question posed by someone, so she's on screen right now.
Thank you, Vicki. So yeah, a question was posed by Rosa, who is a regular panelist in these conversations, but is connecting via chat. And so it was more so a statement around the need for parents to always intervene when schools tend to apply any labels on the child. Even closely monitoring the testing process for learning disabilities and proposed treatments. And another part of her comment is in regards to, really getting second, third, even fourth opinions, and doing your own research, which can alter the outcome tremendously for just the testing process and how kids are labeled. One thing I would add, I started my professional career as a teacher, and so taught in both suburban and urban settings over the course of 5 years, and then led children's ministry at a church in Virginia. And I couldn't agree more with what Rosa suggested about being able to advocate for our children, and understanding that as we're going through an assessment or testing process, being involved in it. Many times as a teacher, I know that some of the language was hard for our parents to understand. I mean, you're talking about a possible diagnosis, various tests, you're using acronyms, you're throwing out a lot of terms that parents aren't necessarily familiar with. And I think there's an opportunity within, as a teacher or within the school system, to be able to provide resources that support in kind of any gaps in knowledge, so that people are well aware of the process and really engaging people in the process. I know that, many times when we were getting ready for our IEP meetings and thinking about an individual education plan for our kids, took great care in trying to, make sure that the parents were contacted, that they knew when to come, that they knew what we'd be discussing, and then offering opportunities for them to ask the questions that they had. And then even within children's ministry, I know that there was one particular instance where the child was being going through the assessment process, and again, the parents had no idea what all of that entailed. And we actually had a principal in our congregation, and I said, hey, would you mind sitting with the parents and just having a conversation about what they need to ask and be clear on when they go into this meeting? Because a lot of times you have all these experts around the table, and then you as the parent, it can be a little daunting to even be able to make sense of it and know the right things to say in order to advocate for your kids. So I do think that it takes, individuals who understand a bit of the process to walk alongside others who may not be exposed to it, and to support them in it. And I think as a school system, a school system, there is some level of responsibility to make sure that your parents are aware and know what they're agreeing to when their child is in that type of process.
Yes, those are very good points. Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, Crystal. Does anybody have any comments before we shift gears to the prison reform part of this dialogue?
Well, I think we're there, and maybe this will help transition it. We talked about getting the parents, making sure they're involved and things like that. Oftentimes getting their involvement can be difficult. Not only is getting their involvement sometimes difficult, but getting them to, I won't say accept, but at least acknowledge that somebody has an opinion or has a conclusion with some level of validity concerning the child, whether there is some type of delay, whether there is some type of abnormality that could easily be adjusted or corrected, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes it can be as simple as a pair of glasses. Sometimes it can be as simple as getting hearing checked. Sometimes it can be as simple as some basic testing, so that we can determine whether or not there's a real delay or whether there is an impediment, such as some short-term something or other going on as to why they can't focus that long. Because you can find some that may have certain physical delays, but extreme intelligence. Because they don't necessarily run hand in hand. That there's a deficit in intelligence because there may be a deficit or some type of delay. And so, that is one of the things that's also helps. But sometimes when that's ignored or when it's negated, then you end up with situations where you have children that get labeled because they continue to disrupt, or continue to end up in the principal's class, or continue to end up in fights, or continue to end up in things that cause them to have a home at the juvenile court or juvenile prison or whatever. And so, those are the kind of things that make it hard. And then that's where that pipeline starts.
Yes, indeed. It sounded like somebody was making another comment.
Before we move away from schools, because that's coming, right? Are we shifting? This is a little bit of a jump, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Okay.
I think another piece of this puzzle is making sure that we have quality sex education in our schools, in middle schools especially, because I personally know girls who dropped out of school after getting pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a big link there between dropping out and teen pregnancy. And I think if we had real quality education in health class, that could help reduce those numbers. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, to your point, Quinn, when I was a substitute teacher in North Carolina while I was in seminary, I can't remember. I mean, I'm not going to name the school anyway, but there were 1 or 2 high schools where some girls teenage girls had kids, and then they were able to bring them to school. There was like a little nursery. Somebody was watching them throughout the daytime so that the girls could finish school. You know, I don't know how many counties across this country are doing that, but that was definitely present in the county where I was in seminary. So
That's impressive.
I found that to be interesting. What? Go ahead, Quinn. You were saying something.
Oh, I was just saying that's impressive. I definitely don't think that that's the norm everywhere. But if there are ways that they can encourage those girls to finish school too, that's definitely a good thing.
Yes. Okay, let's shift gears, and you know, I mean, we've talked about last time on the 7th, October 7th, and tonight, and we've talked about the school to prison pipeline. You know, the goal is to save kids from going down this path, but once they end up in, you know, the juvenile detention system, and you know, once adults, you know, end up in prison, you know, a lot of prisoners go through things while they're in prison. We have a lot of problems within the prison system, as we all know. And so I wanted to shift gears and talk about prison reform. You know, we have a couple attorneys on here, a couple pastors, an educator. So let me quickly give the definition that I found for prison reform. It says it's the attempt to improve conditions inside prisons, improve the effectiveness of a penal system, or implement alternatives to incarceration. It also focuses on ensuring the reinstatement of those whose lives are impacted by crimes. And then I found 4 prison reform purposes, and it said retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, and rehabilitation. And on the website unodc.org, it said, it was talking about, well, it said, why promote prison reform? And some things it listed were human rights considerations, imprisonment and family poverty, health concerns while in prison, and then, you know, those prisoners are released as ex-offenders into the community, and they might have HIV, hepatitis B and C, STDs, malaria, and now COVID-19. And also the staff could get exposed to some of these diseases. And then it also lists cost of imprisonment, social concerns, impact. And just one other thing that I wanted to mention, let's see, prison reform. I have written down evidence-based prison programming has been shown to reduce recidivism, save taxpayer expenditures, increase future employment for individuals who are incarcerated, and decrease rule violations in prison facilities. So those are the things I wanted to mention to introduce this topic. And I'll just, you know, I'll just open it up to whoever wants to start talking about prison reform. What have you all had as, what are your experiences? What kind of work have you done in this area? Anybody can start.
Well, I don't know if it's so much reform, but I'll start by saying I've always tried to encourage my clients who had to spend a significant amount of time, through no fault of mine, of course, that, you know, that they take advantage of whatever programs may be offered, and not just you know, use it as the daily gym or whatever, but to, you know, find out whether or not they can take some college courses, or see if there's something that they can do to make sure that they can either continue whatever trade they may have, or extend the trade that they do have, so that when they come out, they have something to look for or look forward to that will help keep them out and not put them on the path to go back. It's hard enough it's hard enough finding something as an ex-felon, but it's even harder if you have no skills or no education to fall back on. So that's definitely something that I always try to encourage my clients to do is, take advantage of it. And if they don't have it at the one that you get shipped to, then suggest it and tell them that they're doing it at other prisons. Why not here? Or other facilities. Why not here? And press for it, because a lot of times it's the demand that makes the supply get fulfilled. Not only that, if this institution finds out that they can get money sometimes for doing it, it may encourage them, because that's always a help, knowing that they can get money for it.
Yes. I would imagine that it would be quite frustrating for people, some of the prisoners to do what you're talking about, Attorney Dupree. They hone a trade or learn one, but then they get out into the world as an ex-offender and they can't find work. I know that the Second Chance Act gives grants, but I'm not sure, is that still in place? The Second Chance Act, it was in place for years where ex-offenders could get money, either to pursue an education, further education, or to start their own businesses. So if someone can't find a job, they could start, he or she could start his or her own business, but are those funds still available? I'm not sure. Does anybody know? The Second Chance Act, they had millions available for ex-offenders. So nobody can answer. Okay. I'm not sure, but anyway, I know, I have met some ex-offenders over the last, I've been out of law school for 17 years. I've met some ex-offenders, male and female, and it's so frustrating to get out, however they prepared themselves in prison, and then they get out and they can't find work. I know that certain occupations will hire ex-offenders, like some car dealerships will hire them, some like in the fitness industry. Where else?
Industry.
Go ahead.
The construction industry.
Construction. Yeah, we can name, maybe a handful of businesses who will hire, that will hire ex-offenders, but there aren't a lot of them. So, what do they do? I understand what you're saying, they can hone trades and everything, but does anybody have a comment?
I'll add to that. With our Green Social Justice Ministry, we work with prison reform on several levels. One, bringing attention to pre-trial and pre-arrest or pre-detention types of programs that are needed in the community. And so with the forming of things like fatherhood initiatives, we allow or connected with courts and judges and fathers with children that they otherwise wouldn't have been in their lives, and they don't have to be locked up for things like child support and those kinds of things. And then when they get out, they don't have a job either because they've lost their job while they've been in jail. And it starts a vicious cycle that can even lead to criminal offenses. And so I think the pre-arrest, pre-trial detention efforts is definitely something that's very important, and it puts them in a positive contact and a effective contact with those that are part of the correctional system. The other thing that goes along with that is when they're there, as the attorney said, there was a lot of other programs that they were able to get education, take college courses, those kinds of things. I shared on our last meeting that I taught school in the prison system for several years myself while I was in college. And most of those programs, and especially in many states, unfortunately, very much all of the southern states have gotten rid of those types of services, and it's more about restricted movement. It's more about punishment, and the prison industries that have been placed there are not for the betterment uh, of the inmates, but for the betterment of the prison. And so they're making your HBO customer service calls. They're taking complaints over the telephone. It's not just making license plates like it used to be, or as you see on television. They're doing some of everything, but it's not skills that they could take back out into the workforce. And if it is, it's not ones that they're allowed to, like we see in right now with the California firefighters. They train firefighters in prison to be able to fight the wilderness fires that are burning in California. But when they get out, they're lawfully banned from being able to take those same skills and be hired as a fireman, even though they have all the same training and experience. And so pushing for those types of things with considerations for what's already in place, and just giving a fair opportunity to those that would need it because of having been incarcerated. So there are social programs that people can have access to, but if a prisoner gets out and comes home, they may not immediately get the same emergency food support that someone that's just in the community would get. And so one of the things we try to do is connect them with those type resources, and get them to a place where they understand where their support is within the community, so that that can make a difference as well. And if they don't have a possibility of getting a job, it's hard to integrate back into society. And so we teach, our services and other programs as well are focused on things like financial management, personal marketing, essentially resume preparation, interview skills, how to take and hone the skills that you do have. What did you do before you were incarcerated, and how can we help to support that? And then what we found also is that there are certain licensings and certain trades that if you have credentials, it gives you a higher possibility of getting past the no on job application, or having to check former felon in that box may disqualify somebody else. But if you are a licensed electrician, and that's a very rare skill, you would get some consideration. And so part of reform is making ways for them to be valuable assets in returning to the community, not just someone that has been warehoused for however many years or however much time they've been there.
Okay, thank you, Reverend Clee. Attorney Neal, what's your experience up there in Michigan?
Well, right now there's a lot going on in Michigan. In fact, the governor just signed a new bill last week dealing with trying to help criminals or people who have been convicted of different felonies expunge their record. It's changing the rules and how they can get their records cleared so that they can become employable in the workforce when they are released from prison. So those are some of the things that have been changed up here, and the changes that are taking place. There are a lot of things that are happening up here as far as trying to reform the prison system, and it's up to, you see more individual prosecutors' offices doing different things. Now, some of the things that some of the prosecutors are doing, they may not be more favorable to the community and contrary to the role of the prosecutor, but you see those things happening here in trying to make sure that people that have been incarcerated can become productive members of society once they are released from incarceration.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Neal. Anyone else have a comment? If not, I'm going to throw out another question. Anyone else have a comment? Okay, and we're about halfway finished. I forgot to, tell all of the panelists, guest panelists, and viewers, we're talking about some really important issues here, and you've heard comments. These are some really impactful things that people are saying, powerful comments. So if you would please share this video on your Facebook pages so that other people can hear. Parents need to hear this. Families of current prisoners, ex-offenders. If you would please share so other people can watch this video as we're talking now and later, that would be great. Please share on your Facebook pages. Okay, so my next question is, I'll make a couple comments first. We have an important election coming up, and I think we have 2 weeks left now. And I know that ex-offenders can vote after they've met certain requirements. So can anybody speak to when voting rights are actually reinstated? I just want to, I think it's after, if someone is off of parole, off of probation, but is that correct? Can someone speak on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna bring that up before you changed, so you went the right way.
Okay.
So, because that's an issue, and of course every state has its own rules concerning that, but that's an issue that some states have been having a problem with because with the expunging records. Because if they can expunge records, clear somebody from being considered a felon with no felonies or whatever, then a lot of times that opens that person back up to have their voting ability reinstated. If that happens, then the powers that be, sometimes they're concerned that might dilute their majority, and they may lose. So they're worried about changing the law too much. And it's not because they don't think the expungement is a good thing. It's that oftentimes they don't want to lose. They don't want to get these people back in the voting arena because it can as they say, be a game changer. It can shift the balance. So unfortunately, it's gotten very political. It's a shame.
Yeah.
It's political.
That's essentially voter suppression through incarceration.
Exactly.
And it's not that uncommon. It goes all the way back to the point of arrest where the officer has discretion on how to charge and what they would be charged with. And when they have their own biases and desires of giving one person a break and another person they want to punish to their fullest extent, someone that might not necessarily be a person of color or be a person of poverty or find themselves in on the wrong side of the law might not get the same favorable appearance or the same favorable consideration that someone else that they don't consider a threat would. And that makes a big difference. Being able to expunge or cleanse records, take nonviolent offenses. There's really no reason why nonviolent offenses should ever be able to be felons if it's a situation where nobody was harmed in in the commission of the crime. There's higher penalties and ways to penalize and punish people without giving them a situation that's going to follow them for the remainder of their lives. Different states do have different criteria for regaining your voters' rights. South Carolina, for example, my home state, after you've been off of probation, pardon, parole for 7 years, it's reinstated. North Carolina is completely different, and it's essentially dealing with the crime and then your level of your whether you were how you were released and the interaction that you had, and so it would take some longer to get their licensing. I'm sorry, their right to vote back, which to me kind of sets up for unfair situation. There should be a non-biased way to allow everyone to return to their full citizenship rights, but it's different across states. One place to another, and so that's a real challenge. I think the other thing that goes along with that too is there's other rights that come along with voter registration. It opens you up to being able to get other resources. You're able to get federal loans or grants. You're able to be a part of other selective programs that you can't when you're a felon within the federal government. And so that type of suppression of or disenfranchisement really is it plagues our community, and it puts the person back at a higher rate of returning to the prison system because they don't have the possibility and the resources which others would have.
Yes. Anyone have any comments? Other comments?
Just kind of piggybacking off of that, as the Reverend was speaking, it made me think, typically we view voting as something that responsible adults do. That, we're encouraged as United States citizens, this is something that is your responsibility. And for us to look at formerly incarcerated individuals and say, oh, for everyone else, this is a responsibility, but for you, it's a privilege, and we're taking that away, I think is absolutely ridiculous. And it shows that there are so many problems with our system. So that's all, just a brief statement there.
Yes, I see Attorney Dupree clapping at that one. That is absolutely true. Want to have a comment? Another comment?
I would just piggyback off what everybody has already said. It's, again, getting a person's voting rights restored, as already mentioned, is governed by each individual state, and each individual state has their own different requirements to doing so. That could be a time frame after they've been released from probation or parole. And one thing that seems to catch a lot of people up is that although they may have met the time frame from being released from probation or parole, they haven't satisfied their financial obligations, meaning they haven't paid all their fines and or costs back to the court. So that in itself stops them from getting their rights restored, although they've satisfied the time requirement. And the reason why they cannot satisfy their financial obligations to the court is because they can't gain employment to do so. So it's a double-edged sword. It's hey, we want you to be productive members of society, but we're not going to allow you to be employed in society, which then turns around a lot of, when, as they say in the hood, when you're hungry, you're gonna find a way to eat. And those people then find themselves back in situations that led them to sometimes prison in the first aspect.
Yes.
That's the trip up that I was trying to remember, Attorney Neal, for North Carolina for the longest. The prisoner got charged all of the court costs for processing their trial and trying them, convicting them, or whatever. And when you owe money to the courts, even if the time frame is passed, as you said, you don't get it back. North Carolina did that, but there was a recent ruling that as early as a month ago that barred that or blocked that. Of course, it will be appealed, but there's hope there now in the state of North Carolina that will no longer essentially keep people in debtor's jail because they can't financially buy their voters' rights back, which is just ridiculous within itself. But they can be counted as a voter's block because most of the prisons are placed in rural areas and suburban areas where more people count as voters block population to help with zoning and how voters are counted or precincts are placed. And those prisons the inmates are counted as potential voters, but not given an opportunity to vote. So it's a rigged battle that really doesn't have a lot of fair shakes at all.
It is definitely a double-edged sword, as you just indicated, because as you said, they're counted as potential voters, but then told they can't vote. And then they're told you have to pay back the cost of prosecution, is what it's called. Okay, and now make sense out of that, because you're telling someone who the rule itself doesn't apply equally across the board, because if you're convicted, you have to pay the cost of prosecution. But if you're not convicted, you don't have to pay those same costs. If your case is dismissed, you don't have to pay those costs, but the prosecution still proceeded against you. You just got a different result at the end. Okay. And it also, one area you see this in oftentimes is, especially here in Michigan, in drunk driving cases. They want you to, if a person is convicted of, say, a drunk driving offense, there's an OWI cost recovery that pays the police department. Well, aren't the police government funded? Aren't they a government entity? Don't your tax dollars go to pay for the police department? So basically, they're paying twice.
Wow. That's interesting. Wow. Y'all are making some really interesting points. Anybody else?
Well, here we have, from time to time, we try to do them at least like about 3 or 4 times after a year. We have what we call expungement clinics, where we'll set up a time where, we'll basically have a cattle call for people who want to try to get their records expunged. And as a part of that, we try to have a judge who will be basically on the spot, and someone from the prosecutor's office to, sort of be a fair, since the state has an interest in it, sort of be a fair hearing to determine whether or not the expungement should go forward. And oftentimes the reason that we're having the government's involvement is because we usually make a motion for either reduction or a waiving of costs. And a lot of times, of course, the state will have an interest and sometimes oppose because, of course, that's good taxpayers' money that's going to have to come from somewhere if it's going away. But then on the other hand, a lot of times the costs are just so, obtrusive in amount, and it's just so hard to reasonably think that someone could be able to pay it and move forward in life. And a lot of times it's just good to be able to have a clean slate and know that that's not following you like a Linus's blanket, a pig pens of dirt behind him, that it's just trailing along. And so, I would encourage definitely any area to try these expungement clinics and see if that'll help. And of course, try to keep those particular politicians that are worried about voter voting dilution to stay away, because they'll usually oppose it, especially when you talk about the fact that a vast majority, well, I won't say a vast majority, a vast number of those that are coming out of prison are persons of color. And a lot of times the persons of color have been known to vote, Democratic and stuff like that. And so, there's a Republican feel that they don't want to have a lot more Democrats in the pot. And so, that's always an issue. Always an issue.
Yes, indeed. I just wanted to throw out another question here. We have one pastor on, it looks like my other pastor, Reverend Pt2, it looks like he dropped off the video. So I don't know, he lives on the North Carolina coast and sometimes the connection's not that great. But so anyway, we have one pastor of a church on here, Reverend Clee, and then I'm a minister. I'm not pastoring right now. I have pastored before, but so anyway, my question is, how can we as ministers support, let's say you all as attorneys? What can we do? I know, Reverend Clee is very involved with basically, do you have your own prison ministry, Reverend Clee?
Yes, individually, I work with particular inmates that I've developed relationships with, and will help them in transitions, and they may be just a part of my church or a part of my community. I'm also, I sit on the board of Pre for Evergreen, which is a green social justice ministry geared towards prison reform and returning citizenship. So the formerly incarcerated, that's where we do the green skills programs to bring the formerly incarcerated into fields like getting licensing for solar installation, being able to have marketable skills like setting up panels on homes where it takes certain requirements to do that. We train them in recycling and green jobs. Everything from crumb rubber to just bottles and plastics that have been thrown away. And nobody has a problem with felons working with trash or what they would consider trash. And so it gives them a marketable, employable skill and gives them an opportunity to, once they've been trained and worked with us, they can go on to work in other areas. That ministry started in Charlotte. It's more active in New Jersey area now, but we assist as opportunity presents itself all across the country, really.
Okay, so how I guess I can pose this to the two attorneys on here, and even I'll add educators, since Quinn is on here too. How can pastors, educators, be more supportive of you all as attorneys, and how can we just improve the situation with prisoners getting out and becoming ex-offenders? What can we do? And actually, what can the public do to, make this better for people who have served time?
Well, I would say that one thing that the community as a whole can do, and prisoner re-entry, people that are re-entering the community is, and how the church can play a part is that you have to start educating the people as to what their rights are upon reentry. Something as simple as expunging their record, or the requirements they have to meet to expunge their record and or restore their rights. As I just mentioned, something as simple as they can qualify for an expungement, or qualify to have their rights restored, but they haven't satisfied all of their fines and costs. So sometimes, and educating them in that regard, because what happens oftentimes is the people will come out of prison and they will simply say, well, the time frame has passed and I qualify, but then they get denied. And so they sat there for 5 or 7 years. They worked, but they didn't make any payments to pay off the court fees or fines. Okay. And then when they want to go get their rights restored, they can't. So it's putting those individuals in touch with individuals so they can have these conversations. So when they have satisfied all the requirements, they can move forward to having their rights restored or having their records expunged.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that idea. I know I'm still, even though I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, I'm still on the ministerial team at my church in AME Zion Church in Charlotte. So I know that before I left North Carolina, my pastor was involved in that. You know, we didn't have a prison ministry at the church, but he started helping some people in the community and, you know, a few members of my church, you know, working with trying to get their record expunged and just helping them learn about their rights and everything. So more pastors need to do that. More pastors need to start prison ministries. Any other ideas on what we can do as pastors and like I said, as educators? What can they do?
Well, as a throwback, so since you throw back to North Carolina, I'm gonna throw back to DC, where the church I attended when I was living in DC was did some groundbreaking things back in the 80s when my pastor started what he called Cantata House, Calvary's Alternative to Alcohol and Drug Abuse, which was groundbreaking at the time, and he caught a lot of flack from other pastors and such because you know, they said, why are you going to have these drug addicts and drunkards hanging around the church all the time? And of
That's
course,
horrible.
yeah. But now some of the same pastors have started similar programs, you know, because of how successful it was and how, you know, you end up doing what we're talking about. You get those who, a lot of times, those who have those problems, the alcohol and drug problems, also have the felon problems or have done some time or seen some brushes with the law. And so it all gets wrapped up together that you already have a prison ministry buddy. And so we had those people who were successful in that program end up doing prison ministry and whatnot, and it helped to grow. So a lot of times one will be in will feed the other. And so if there are churches that are looking to do something, start your drug and alcohol outreach, and use that as a mechanism to help those. I mean, it helps all around. It's helped get parishioners married. You know, there's always somebody looking for a spouse and can't find men or whatever. And once these men get cleaned up and get a job and all that kind of stuff, they were for the taking. Of course, with God in their life, so, you know, that had to be the key. But you know, all that kind of thing works together. And of course, you know, there's nothing better than seeing somebody get cleaned up, converted, and a good paying job and become great tithe paying members to the church. You know, that always is a good thing. Always a good thing.
Amen.
And Attorney Dupree, I forgot to mention on here to viewers and to other panelists, Attorney Dupree is also in ministry. So he's speaking from both sides, I guess. So, okay, has anyone on here on the panel tonight worked with children of incarcerated persons? I know Quinn said that she had, but anybody else? Have you all worked with the children through a nonprofit or anything? You know, that's part of the, when I was talking about the reasons for prison reform, I mean, one of the things was dealing with the families and the negative effects it has on families. So has anyone worked with the children?
I have in a I guess a roundabout way with the establishment of fatherhood initiatives. Part of what we do with the fatherhood initiative is encourage fathers to get involved in their children's lives, but do it in a structured way. And so for South Carolina, for example, the governor had a real push towards early child development, Head Start programs, those kinds of things. And so through the Fatherhood Initiative, we train fathers to go into the Head Starts and work with their children, be in class with their children. You might not be able to find a job or, get gainful employment because of something that has happened. So take that opportunity to spend the day at school helping your child. You may have a challenge with the mother or whatever, and we set up essentially what's a visitation center where the children benefit because the parents don't have to get along. There's a window where the child is dropped off at the visitation center and kept by a guardian ad litem, and the mother drops them off because they no longer can tolerate the presence of the father. The father gets to spend time in a supervised area, but not restricted with the child, and then the mother can come back and get them at a later time without there being any question of what has transpired or whether there's been any violation of anything, and so it helps really make an impact on the child's life when the father is involved as far as that goes. And then, as I said earlier, we also partner with judges, with the family court judges, to even at times help them to get their custody rights or have them restored. Some of them have had them taken away because they've been incarcerated or whatever, and others just need to officially get documented custody. For South Carolina, for example, there's no such thing as a father parental custody unless it's gone through the court systems, because the mother is automatically the parental parent, and unless she states on the child's birth certificate at the time of birth that this is the father, he has no legal custody rights without petitioning the court for having them, which I think is absolutely crazy. But through the Fatherhood Initiative, we help fathers actually petition the court to get their legal custody rights, and that helps with visitation rights for the child.
Yes. Okay. It looks like we have about 10 more minutes. Does anyone else have anything to say about how the public can help? What are some immediate strategies for prison reform that, any other suggestions, strategies? How can the public help? We've talked about ministers, pastors, educators. I think, Quinn, are you wanting to say something?
Yes, I think in schools, the more male role models we can have, the better.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like in my school, there are more male teachers than in your average school, but that's not the case everywhere. These young men need positive male role models, and to see that on a daily basis. So I think that's just something, that it's going to take some time, but throughout society, but especially in schools, we need more of.
That is an excellent point. Most definitely. Anybody else?
I'll just add one thing quickly. I think, and we've been seeing some of this as of late with some of the protests that have gone on and some of the stories that have been shared. I think one of the biggest things that the public, including churches, schools, even individual families, can do is, talk, teach, and live against the mindset or mentality that that felons or former felons or People that have had time incarcerated are not people, but they're convicts, they're criminals, they're, all of those kinds of things that paint them in a negative light. And it's easy to discard a person if you dehumanize them by only thinking of them as a criminal or a convict or a felon, instead of John, who made a mistake and has paid his debt to society and is now home and seeking to restore himself into the community. And we're going to embrace him as the person that he is. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do. We don't recognize that laws are formed according to how we see people, and nobody wants to pass laws to help prisoners if, certain voter blocks are going to think you're putting these prisoners back into our neighborhoods, and then they're going to just, rape, rob, and pillage our families. So we're not going to vote for that. And we're not going to vote for you just because of a false image of formerly incarcerated people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Anyone else?
One of the things that, of course, and it's always good is that the families have to stay in touch and keep the incarcerated person encouraged, because a lot of times that whole discouragement and depression thing can set in, and but as long as they know that somebody still cares and is there for them, that will always help. Of course, the family member will always have to push past the manipulation that sometimes comes along with the training, quote unquote, that the felons get by the inmate.
Oh, wow.
Because often they're manipulated into continuing to put money on the books and continuing to make sure that they have access to the things that they would normally have access to outside, which of course some of them are definitely necessary because the prisons don't do well at offering them. But on the other hand, it can drain the family member and cause them to just go into debt, go into whatever. A lot of family members spend time at the payday loan places trying to get money to put on the books so that the people can call and talk about why hasn't such and such happened. It's terrible, but they gotta stay close and keep them encouraged.
Mm-hmm. Okay, those are great points, Attorney Dupree. Attorney Neal, have any comments?
I would just echo the comments already stated by everybody here.
Okay. It's about 9:58. So, I just wanted to thank everybody who has been on this panel tonight. You all have made some excellent points, offered some, great suggestions, and just, really talked about the school to prison pipeline and, prison reform. So hopefully we will have had a lot of people viewing. Hopefully people have shared this on their pages, and we will have more people viewing, tonight or in the coming days. The video is always saved on my Facebook page. Seems like forever. I don't think it ever goes away. But again, I want to thank all of you panelists, viewers. Again, this has been part 2. We've talked about the school to prison pipeline and prison reform. So we hope that you have learned a lot tonight, and we really encourage you to get involved in the communities with these issues. Thank you again for everything, for watching, and for my panelists and guest panelists. Good night.